So today's ship show is all about toxic cultures, and I'm Ben Way, and
I'm Freddie Laker.
Oh shit.
And we're here to talk about all the craziness that we have when it comes to people and organizations. One of the things we talked about in one of the other shows is what type of leader you are and the way that impacts your organization. And today we're going to delve a little bit deeper into that and look at some of the issues that you get as a leader and how you deal with them in an organization, because let's face it, the most important thing in business is people, whether that be your customers, whether that be your team. And the team is what really makes it. You can be a great entrepreneur, but if you've got a useless team, you're not going to get anywhere. But I am going to say something slightly controversial.
No, you?
Yeah, me. But I have actually never been able to overall change somebody's behavior for the long term when I found them not to be productive in the business. I have tried all kinds of ways of motivating them, putting them on courses, and it can work for a short amount of time, but I find over the long run they just come back to their normal behaviors. And so later on in business, I've always got to the point where if somebody isn't functioning or isn't adding to the business, I cut them earlier rather than later. What's your thoughts about that?
Actually, I'm going to have a different view on this. So I've had a lot of people that work for me for sometimes even 15, some approaching 20 years, and they weren't perfect, and not just because they didn't have the right skill set, because they did have some flaws, character-wise. And I do feel like I've been able to change them, but I do think there is certain core traits you can't fix. If someone is not honest, you can't fix that. If someone is selfish, it's really hard to fix that. It's really kind of be core in them. Although I've seen that sometimes I've been able to flip that one. If they don't have a good moral compass, I think that's really core to who you are. But I have seen people that maybe weren't good at working with others, or even a lot of people who ego is a big flaw that I see a lot. And I've been able to help people that had egos, mainly because I had a big ego myself, and I feel like I was able to identify with it as I've been kind of humbled over the years.
But I'm not so much talking about improving people. I absolutely believe in taking somebody and making them allowing them to reach their potential. Actually, that's one of the things that I love as an entrepreneur. And I had a deckhand working on the boat who's now the CEO of one of my businesses. So for me, it's not like you said, you can change people, but there are certain traits that I have found which, however hard I've worked to try and get them over those barriers.
Out of interest, so for me, I find there's like a moment when I was still dating, like I kind of knew whether a girl was one I was going to be really serious about. After about 1 year mark, all the kind of novelty and the sheen of lust wears off a little bit, and you kind of all the BS goes away, and I know whether I'm into them or not. I feel the same way about jobs and companies. Do you feel like there's a mark where for you kind of feel like the novelty factor?
Yeah, I definitely have that. I think there's a few markers. I mean, I love working with super early stage companies. So the most exciting time for me is normally within the first 6 months. That's where I get super engaged. And then once it starts to get into its growth phase, I just get bored, and I find somebody to take over my position. And because one of the things I tell you in business is know what you're good at and know what you're bad at. And I say to people that I'm really, really good at starting companies, but totally useless in running them. Like long-term running companies, it's not my bag. And as soon as it goes into its growth phase, I know that there's better people to do that phase. Though I'll still obviously add value and input. You've got to know what you're good at.
Yeah, it's so funny. So I'm kind of looking at companies the complete opposite way as you are these days. Although I've done a bunch of startups, I'm now helping later stage companies, sometimes companies are 20, 30, 40 years old, that maybe need to go through some period of transformation. And I see toxic cultures a lot of the times when I go in to help these companies, many times frequently through private equity firms I work with. you are now looking at, in your case, dozens of companies. I know you might be helping at any time at the earliest stage, and you've seen how a toxic culture can get created. Then, for you, what are the negative repercussions that you see most commonly when a culture goes wrong?
So what I've found is if there's kind of, in a very early stage business, if there's like 3 managers or senior directors in the business and 2 of them have an issue with each other, it can completely rip apart the organization very, very rapidly. And I'm actually dealing with this in one of my companies right now, where you have one individual in a team of about 5 that is just not part of the team and makes it as difficult as possible to interact with them, and it just drags everyone else down. It gets to the point where you're just like, why are you putting this time and effort into this business when, clearly unless something changes, it's gonna fall apart. And the problem is, even if you make that point that as I have done, because it's not my company, to the management, it's up to the management to change it. And what I found in a lot of these cases with people in a toxic culture are people actually scared to make a change. And it's the same in entrepreneurism all over. If you see something wrong and you're scared to change it, then you're never going to succeed, because it's that kind of pivoting, that process. You don't get everything right straight away. It's going to be an iterative process.
But have you ever seen, in your experience, situations where sometimes someone it isn't because they're bad, it isn't because they haven't got their heart in the right place, but actually the company just kind of outgrows them, and then it becomes toxic, not because they're doing it wrong, and you might adore that person, but it just they're not able to serve the company, and then that starts creating negative feelings and can create all kinds of cultural issues.
Oh, absolutely, and the classic example of that, as we know, is when you bring in venture, right? And you have, the people that started the company having a diametrically opposed view from the investors. And in a lot of cases, the investors win, and they put in their own management, and then the founders feel totally screwed over because they have been pushed out of the business by their funders.
Question for you, I'm inspired, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much. Last week you talked about how when you were 16 going on 17, you effectively got pushed out of one of your own companies. The experience you have now, if the roles were reversed, do you think you would have done that same thing to you, or do you still think they were wrong? I've never asked you this before, so I hope I'm not putting you on the spot on camera.
It's a very interesting one. I would have.
Because maybe the company had outgrown you. I don't know. I'm just asking you.
From my point of view on that particular one, I think there were some things that they could have done, which I think would have been fair. Because of the way they started the process and the way it ended, I think their overall process was flawed. Partly because they effectively pushed me out of the company without allowing me to do what I was good at, which is why they brought me into the company in the first place. But I think there's certainly some things, and I think in some of my other companies as well, where certain things have happened, or venture partners have happened, and it hasn't been positive for me, but I've understood why people have done it. But as I get older, I see those things coming much earlier, and as an entrepreneur, I would highly recommend, if you're in your own situation where you can feel something is off, it's all about communication and heading it up early, because if you don't, it will cause problems.